A lot has changed in podcasting over the last 15 years, but many of the tips and tricks that every podcaster should know are still just as relevant. Seth Goldstein joins me on Podcasting Amplified in this episode to share the extensive podcasting insight that he's gained from spending over 15 years in this space. And in this episode, you'll discover the biggest changes in podcasting over the last 15 years and the essential tips and tricks that every podcaster still needs to know. How long should a podcast episode be? The best ways to use AI for podcasting, and is video essential for podcasters, and much more. Whether you've been podcasting for just a few months or if you're one of the OGs, this episode is worth a lot more than the 30 minutes or so it will take you to listen. Seth Goldstein, thank you for joining me on Podcasting Amplified.
Hey, buddy, how's it going?
Yeah, all good,
Hello
thanks.
from across the pond.
Yes, how are you doing?
I'm doing very well. I'm excited to be talking about podcasting on a podcast. Very meta.
Yes, always. And you've been in podcasting for over 15 years now, which I think for a lot of people will be very surprising. Like, we're going back to sort of near the early days of podcasting in general, and I know a lot of people...
Yeah, I'm the second round of OG, I like to say. First round was, I think, Adam Curry coined the phrase in 2005.
Yeah.
And then I have been listening since Daily Source Code. When they came out, I found out about it then, but I didn't know my head from my backside on how to do this. And then technology kind of caught up. Like Hangouts on Air came out, Google with Google Plus, and we could record stuff that way. And I started figuring out how to do it around 2010. And I've made every mistake in the book.
So when did you decide to get on board, and like when did you launch your first podcast?
First podcast was 2010, 2011. I actually bought a physical book on how to podcast. Remember those? I think this is like just when Kindles were starting to come out.
Yeah.
But I remember going to Barnes & Noble in the States and walking around and found a book on podcasting. And I was like, oh, this sounds like fun. So I read that cover to cover. Made about like a 3% kind of made sense. Third of it made sense. And I was just like, okay, let me figure this out. And I did. My first podcast was my first 3 or 4 podcasts were on social media, because that was the height of the Web 2.0 boom. Like Facebook was just kind of really getting its stride. Twitter was getting its stride. People were using it. Remember Clout? Are you old enough to remember Clout?
Yeah. Yeah,
exactly. Clout was a big thing we talked about. Now we did Addicted to Social Media. We did Social Media Addicts. And then I did marketing forward for a little while there. So a lot of marketing podcasts, because that's kind of where my wheelhouse lies. So.
Yeah, it's interesting. Like, I'm still one of the few that seem to still read physical books. It's quite... I
read them. If you're watching the video, you can see
I can see plenty behind you. But it seems to be quite hard to find, even today, like a good book on podcasting, to be honest. There aren't that many.
They're all blog posts.
Yeah, just recycled blog posts, yeah.
They're all blog posts, or they're podcasts on podcasts.
Yeah. So you said you've made a lot of mistakes along the way. Is there any that stick out to you that you have in mind?
Not planning is the biggest one. Just kind of saying, I'm a big proponent of throwing stuff at the wall and seeing what sticks, but having somewhat of a plan on where you're going to go with it helps. So a lot of times I'll be like, I want to do a podcast on this, and I'll just start recording and put it out there. And it'll fizzle after 3 to 4 episodes because there was no kind of idea of where I was going. I'm a very big proponent, especially with my clients in my podcast mastery program. I tell them they need to have an idea of where they want to go, but don't sit on the first episode forever, because it's not going to be perfect. The first episode always sucks. It's always cringeworthy. You're always going to go back, and you're always going to be like, oh my God, that was my first podcast.
Yeah.
But that's what I'm talking about. Like, just get started on it, but have a clear plan of kind of where you want to go with it. And then you can get past the 10 episode kind of dichotomy there. That is like, that's where people get stuck. It's like between 3 and 10 episodes, people fizzle out.
And when you say where you want to go with it, are you talking in terms of like what the podcaster wants to get out of it? Like what kind of impact you want to have, or is it sort of a mix of all these things?
A little bit of both, a little bit of all that, because you have to kind of think about like, what are your goals for this podcast? And also, what do you want your listeners to get out of it? And then also you want to think about, do you want to have a guest on your podcast, or do you want to be a talking head podcast where it's just you pontificating out to the world? Lots of different things. Or do you want to do a mix of interviews and, pontifications? A little bit of all that. And you have to kind of just have an idea generally where you want to go. I mean, it can change, and there's nothing wrong with it pivoting. It's just having a general gist of where you want to go. Don't be so spicy about it and just kind of throw things out there.
Yeah, I can see a lot of podcasters who maybe think about one or two of those things, but not all of them. Like, especially if someone's starting a podcast around, bringing in more clients for their business, for content marketing, they might be thinking about what they want to get out of it. But really, really understanding the ideal listener and what they want from it, I think, is missing a lot of the time.
And that'll actually help you as the podcaster, because if you're gearing to what the listener wants, that's also possibly your clients, and you want to know what your clients want so you can provide them value.
Definitely. And then speaking a bit more specifically about what you're doing, your podcast that you host currently is Entrepreneur's Enigma. So
yes, that's my big one. I actually have 3 because I'm insane.
Okay, yeah. Yeah, I mean, I've got ideas, but I don't think I can handle more than one right now.
No, I have 1 weekly, 1 monthly, and 1 that's kind of goes with podcast mastery. When I want to rant about something, I'll put it out. So really, there's 2 that are kind of on set schedules, and 1's kind of a fly-by-night kind of don't do what I say, not what I do kind of podcast. Like, when there's something to talk about that really hits a button with me, I will go on the podcastmastery.fm podcast and talk about it.
Nice. Okay. So what was the...
Entrepreneur's Enigma has been going on for a while, yeah.
And what was the trigger to start that one then?
COVID.
Yeah.
COVID, I was sitting around. I just ended it, I think, a year before. 2021. Yeah, I had just ended season 2 of Digital Marketing Dive. That's the monthly podcast now. And I was like, I want to do I've been an entrepreneur since 2008, doing my digital marketing agency, Goldstein Media. And I literally, it started out as a pontification podcast. As me as a talking head talking about my journey as in the enigma, the puzzle of being an entrepreneur. Then I realized no one gives a crap about what I have to say. And so I went back to my journalism roots, because I was a journalist for 6 years out of college. And I'm like, let me interview other entrepreneurs about the puzzle, about the enigma that they are facing. And so literally episode 1 of Entrepreneur's Enigma was actually a pivot, because there's actually nowhere on the internet that I'm aware of 10 other episodes where I'm just talking into my phone or talking into the microphone about my experiences. So episode 1's really behind the curtain is actually episode 11. And I'm now on episode 262. Don't advise going. I advise all my. This is one of those things about learning about from your mistakes. Is I advise do seasons or do like a grouping, like do 20 episodes, take a few weeks off, come back to this season 2. I'm on season 1, episode 262. Oops, I never changed the season.
What? So you're saying if you went back, you would do seasons. What would? Is that just so you get a break, or so you can sort of regroup?
Pretty much. You kind of have to kind of not fizzle out. And I haven't fizzled out on Entrepreneur's Enigma because I figured, and this is a good thing for a lot of podcasters to know, is that it's opened doors for me to talk to people that I would not normally have a reason to talk to, or would have to cold outreach to these CEOs and entrepreneurs that are really interesting people that I want to talk to. I want to hear their stories. I want to potentially work with them. And I wouldn't have a real reason to reach out to them unless I said, "Hey, let's talk about you for 20 minutes." And everyone wants to talk about themselves for 20 minutes.
Yeah. I've been talking a lot about this recently because a lot of our clients, that's why they have a podcast mainly. So before they've even got a single listener, they're already benefiting just from being able to get people on, because these are like executives that if they approach them and said, "Do you want to get on a 15-minute clarity call?" they'll say no, or they won't even they'll ignore it. But if it's,
You won't get past the secretary.
yeah, but if it's, do you want to go on an hour-long podcast and speak to me about all your challenges and what you're doing in the business, they'll be up for it a lot of the time.
I've made some great friends through podcasting, like marketing, like colleagues, like business friends. Not, I mean, would I go out and get a beer with them, a pint? Absolutely. But like, I've made some great friends in Toronto. One of my good friends, we do work together now because she does social media marketing, like the implementation of stuff that I don't do. And she's become a great referral partner. It's amazing. Gets me out of the house, virtually at least.
Yeah, I know what you mean. And you mentioned about that you've pulled one of your podcasts back to monthly. How's that been? Like, are you seeing slower growth with that, or is it just because you want to keep it going but don't have time? Or
well, that's Digital Marketing Dive. That was weekly, and I was doing that weekly along with Entrepreneurs Enigma weekly, and that was a lot, and that was insane. And that's always been with a co-host, and every season I have a different co-host, and it just kind of happened that way because they would burn out on weekly, and it turned out to be nice because every time I have a different co-host on a different season, I did do seasons with that, and it turned out to be kind of nice. But I kind of like to have the same co-hosts going forward, and so I was talking to my new co-host Brian, who's a great guy who does a lot of work with me, and he's like, let's do monthly. Because I'm doing Entrepreneurs Enigma weekly. I have my pontification podcast, podcastmastery.fm that I want to do every now and then. And then I'm like, well, monthly, if you set expectations with your audience, like, hey, this season's going to be monthly. We're going to do 10 to 12 episodes. This is what to expect. And then you go away for a few months. That's not fizzling out. It's more like, hey, we're going to go for the long haul. We're going to do 262 episodes, and you get 10 out, and then you disappear. That's fizzling out.
yeah, and I think it's so much worse when it's like a podcast starts off doing weekly, and you'll see in their description, their intro, it's a weekly podcast, but then you look at their feed, and it's like, oh, you haven't posted in a month, and people don't know what to expect.
It's worse than that. If it's like you haven't posted in a month, you assume something happened. If it's more, I've seen podcasts that are like, we're doing twice weekly podcasts, and they don't come out in like for 2 or 3 months, and I'm like, I guess they fizzled.
Then that's why you have something like 4 million podcasts on the podcast platforms, but only a fraction of those are actually
200
in active. And when you moved to these interview episodes, moved away from solo, you kept them quite short. So your Entrepreneurs Enigma, the episodes are sort of 20-30 minutes long in general. What was the thought behind that? Why didn't you want to go for the full-on hour to 2 hour deep dive that a lot of these podcasts nowadays are doing?
I'm a talker, if you can tell already. But even I fizzle out of talking about 45 to an hour. And I also figured that a lot of people are going to listen to these on the commute to work. And in America, in the U.S., a commute is generally 20, 25 minutes if you're lucky. Or if it's longer, they can listen to 2 episodes. Or they're doing something around the house, and it's not reading this in the New York Times, where you're going to be like going stuff for an hour or 2 hours on a podcast. I mean, some of these tech podcasts are really long, and they have a lot to talk about, and it's great. But it's literally like each one is taking the New York Times Sunday edition, which is about like a foot tall, full of stuff to read, and it takes you all week to get through. I much rather get to the point and have a structure and have it done in 20 to 30 minutes. People tend to appreciate that more than they don't finish. I feel like they finish my shows more than if it was an hour-long podcast. And I've noticed that when I've had ones that go 45 minutes, they don't finish.
Yeah, I guess it's different for different podcasts. Like, I totally get what you're saying. I agree that, sort of once it gets to the hour mark, I start to kind of fizzle out. I feel like maybe it's easier for people doing live studio interviews when you're kind of sitting there in a comfy chair in front of someone with a drink. It feels more like you're just, having a drink with them and talking. But when it's, a Zoom call or just a call over the internet, I feel it's a bit more exhausting.
It is. I mean, I don't know how people can get through a Joe Rogan episode. And they're 4 or 5 hour long episodes. I don't know how the guests can sit there for that long. I mean, I know that the This Week in Tech podcast, those are, and on the Twit Network with Leo Laporte, they're all like 2-3 hours long. I love those shows, and I will get through them because they're interesting, but they have segments.
Yeah.
And they have bits and pieces of different things that they're talking about. It's not just talking back and forth with one person the whole time.
Yeah, I don't have a huge amount of time. I'm listening to podcasts all day anyway for work, so it's like Diary of a CEO, similar kind of thing, 2-3 hours. Someone that I quite like his stuff. He was on there recently.
I love that show.
Yeah. The Daniel Priestley one, because I follow what he does. I wanted to listen to that one, but yeah, I had to listen to 45 minutes while I was doing the big shop, 30 minutes while I was on a walk later in the week, the rest of it next weekend on the next shop, and then by the time you've done that,
you haven't finished yet?
Yeah, and then, well, I've finished that one now, but by the time you've finished it, he's released 3 more episodes, so I can never keep up.
You're like, oh, overwhelming.
Yeah,
exactly.
And are you?
Some people have the stamina for it. I don't.
Yeah. I don't think. I'm not sure I could sit down in one sitting and listen to the whole thing.
No.
So are you actively marketing all 3 of these podcasts then?
Yeah, I mean the podcast mastery one, not as much because I literally just started that. Digital Marketing Dive, I'll put it on social media. I'll put it out on the feeds and all that. Say, hey, go check this out. I have a weekly newsletter because I'm absolutely insane. So it goes in the weekly newsletter to people as well. So people find out through there as well. And Entrepreneurs Enigma, I feel like it's on such a cadence that people just know to tune in. Every Tuesday around 9:30 it hits. Well, technically it hits around 7:45. I don't talk about it till 9:30. I mean, if you're in your feed player, in your podcast player, it'll hit around 7:40 on average. But by the time I put together the page, it's not till 9:30.
And over time,
it's sanity check.
Yeah, like what have you seen? Because I guess you've been marketing podcasts for a while now. What have you seen that works and what hasn't worked, and has it changed over time how you've been able to attract new listeners?
Oh, everything's changed, especially with AI. Like AI literally has its hands in everything.
Yeah.
But I've seen that the production of podcasts, at least the podcasts I've done and help my clients with, is so much easier to edit and get things out and get the clips out and all that stuff faster because AI can find those little tidbits of information versus you going through and like listening to your whole podcast, cutting things out. I used to cut things out as I would go and say, oh, that's a good clip. Now I put it into Opus Clip or I put it into Cast Magic and I find those clips and I'm like, that's a good one. Download, upload. I've gotten to the point with Entrepreneurs Enigma where it's about 2 minutes of editing for every 1 minute of show. Because remember, this is not public radio. This is not the BBC for you. This is not NPR for me. It doesn't have to be buttoned up. Like we're just shooting them right now, having a good time, talking, and people listen for the personalities. They don't listen for no, this is the BBC World News Hour. Like if they want that, they're going to go to public radio. Otherwise, podcasts are a lot more colloquial.
Yeah, thanks for spelling out the swear word. It saves.
I wasn't sure how you were doing that. So I'll spell that out because it's still the saying. I wasn't saying poop, and I'm like, that doesn't sound as good.
Yeah, no, I don't mind. It will save Roger, our editor, from having to put a bleep over it. I just I'm not bothered, but I turn them off just because I know iTunes is a bit strict around it. If you miss off the explicit label, then and you've got one in there, then it can cause you problems.
Yeah, I find that the poop ones don't flag as much, but the more sweary ones do.
Okay.
So I'm commonly on Entrepreneurs Enigma just hitting the explicit tag because even if I miss one, I'm like, it's probably one in there.
Yeah, just to be safe. Speaking of AI, on your latest episode of Entrepreneurs Enigma, I think you mentioned like if AI isn't in your business, like what are you doing? If it isn't in there somewhere. So how are you using AI? You mentioned about Opus Clip, which allows you to automatically clip out shorts for people that aren't aware, but are there any other ways that you're using it?
gives me the transcript, actually understands my Philadelphia English. It actually understands what I'm saying, which is shocking because, I mean, we're recording this on Squadcast, which is owned by Descript.
Yeah.
Descript barely understands a word I say. But, like, enough that I can edit it. But I would never publish that transcript. Cast Magic, I don't know what model they're using, but it understands what I say. Because I talk really fast. I slur my words from time to time. My words don't have spaces in the middle half the time. And it picks it up. But it also, Cast Magic is really good because it gives me the timestamps of key elements. So I can put the timestamp in and then turn those into chapters, which is kind of fun.
So you use that for transcripts. You've also got Squadcast. Yeah, if I ever need a transcript, I don't use them that much, so I'm not too worried about it. I do use Descript just because it's part of Squadcast to save some money, basically.
I love it.
That's interesting.
Exactly, yeah.
With Cast Magic, like if I need one a bit more accurate, Otter as well. Otter AI.
But you speak pretty clearly. I'm sure Descript sounds pretty good.
Yeah, I guess it depends on how the audio quality comes out.
Me, on the other hand, I think the parallel would be my Philadelphia English is like Yorkshire for you guys.
Okay. Yeah. Well, I can hear you, so
you fast talk, no spaces.
I can get you, so hopefully, I will anyway. And what about the rest of your
I'm talking slower today.
setup? Like, how has that changed over time? Like, did you? I know you said at the beginning you were recording on your phone.
I used to use the phone, and because I was using Anchor, which was now owned by Spotify, and they had a good app, and I was like, all right, well, I'll go for a walk, I'll talk and pontificate. Turns out no one wanted to listen to that, and I don't blame them. So, that was at the start of Entrepreneur's Enigma. It was during the pandemic. I had this set up at home, but I was like, when something pops into my head I want to talk about, I'm going to record a podcast. Having the structure, sitting down at the computer with the microphone works so much better. Even though the iPhones now are incredible. I mean, you can record a podcast on an iPhone just fine, but you don't want to be walking on gravel roads while you're podcasting, unless that's what you're going for. And then you should.
Yeah, well, I'm
crunch.
an audio guy. Like that's my main thing, where my sort of education lies. So I'm pretty picky with how things sound. But your audio sounds good anyway. You've obviously got a solid mic now and everything.
Yeah, I made sure of that. I got my mixer here, all that good stuff. So.
And I just want to dive into a little bit more because a lot of podcasters listening, they haven't been podcasting for that long, maybe 2-3 years, or maybe back around COVID time, like you had mentioned. I think with some technologies, they've moved a lot faster than podcasting has. Like, we're still on RSS feeds, which is quite an old technology in that. But has there been any other like key changes that you've noticed in the podcasting space over the last 15 years or so?
A lot more video.
Yeah.
And a lot more people trying to do video in the RSS, which you can do. But I usually say put the videos on YouTube, keep the audios to the RSS, then have on your website, have a spot for the video, have the spot for the audio. And so if people want to watch you talking to somebody or whatever you're doing on your podcast, great. But always have the audio available for people who want to passively listen. Always have it. I mean, because YouTube came out, I think it was like earlier this week or last week, saying that 1 billion people listen to podcasts on YouTube. And I'm like, and now people are kind of questioning that number. Like, are they actually watching podcasts, or do they just have it on in the background and they're doing their stuff and all that? I think the audio industry and podcasting is getting all threatened by that. And I think there will always be a spot for audio podcasts. I think some talk podcasts benefit from having video because you can see the links that they're talking about. They share their screen. They share the news article, like on the tech podcasts. But other times, audio is all you need. Start with the audio, master your craft. Not saying don't record the video, but the video is great for the clips. That's really where it really needs to boil down. Is even if you don't publish the full video, use use the video for your sound bites that you share on social media.
Yeah, it's definitely been a big shift towards video. Like, you can now upload the video on Spotify, but again, it just everything with podcasting feels a little bit slow. Like you can't separate the audio. As far as I know, if you put the video on Spotify, even if somebody's just listening, they're still going to be listening to the video audio.
On Spotify does that.
Yeah.
I know Transistor splits it because they don't let you do video, but you
Yeah.
can put up an MP4 and it will pull out the audio from the video. Or on Transistor, I always say just put the audio up there because that's what they want. They don't have video feeds yet.
Because for me, we do a separate edit, so the audio is edited separately, because you can get away with edits you can't get away with on video. So when someone's listening,
I just do jump clips. Like if there's something that needs to be done, if there's a big gaffe, I'm like, all right, it's a big gaffe. But I don't edit that much because I feel like it's more genuine when people do hear someone kind of pause. Now, a pause of 2 seconds is long enough. Like if there's a pause of 30 seconds when I ask one of my bigger questions, I'm like, all right, that one's got to be dialed back a little bit because 30 seconds is like the podcast end.
30,
abruptly.
yeah, wow, yeah, I keep them below.
It's like, what happened? And they're coming back, and you're like, they're back.
Yeah. How do you see things moving forward then? In terms of, do you think we'll see a lot more of a shift towards that? Because I do agree that not all podcasts need video, and I feel like some people feel like they have to do video, and then
you don't have to do video.
Yeah, like a business podcast, if you're just teaching, talking head, that can work for video. But if you're telling a story, and you want people to get
almost better
immersed in it, especially if it's like fiction or anything like that, you don't need to see the person read it and read all the characters and all that kind of thing. Like some podcasts just don't work for video.
What I would suggest for that is put up your screen art on your screen art. Put up your album art on the MP4, on the video, and have the audio behind it, and then put that up on YouTube. So people who want to listen on YouTube, because apparently there's 1 billion people listening to podcasts on YouTube, or YouTube Music, or I'm not sure how they're putting that metric in. But if they want to listen to it, it's kind of, you can make that happen by putting up your screen, your podcast art, and just having the audio behind it. That's what I usually tell my clients.
Just to get it on there. I don't know where they get their stats. It's like LinkedIn. I think they say there's 1 billion people on there. Are there actually 1 billion, or is it just 1 billion accounts? And I don't know. You never know how they're counting them.
Dead,
yeah.
It's all fun.
Yeah, it reminds me, I was speaking to somebody, he contacted me after watching one of my videos about 6 months ago, talking about starting his podcast. He just wanted some advice, basically. And we talked briefly about it, but he could only talk for like 10 minutes. And I think I missed a call and called him back, and he was having a haircut or something. But 6 months later, just the other day, he contacted me again and said, and we had a bit more of a chat, and he said he still hasn't launched his podcast. And so I was asking, like, what's stopping you? Because he was really passionate about it. Where he lives in South Africa, there aren't many people doing podcasts, and he wanted to make that a thing and hear some of the voices around from where he lives. And he said it's the video. Like, he can't find a studio, he's sourcing camera and all that kind of stuff. And I said, you can just start and just do audio. Because if you'd have started 6 months ago, then you would have started to gain some traction, started to see what people like and what people don't. And then, episode 10,
Absolutely.
Now we're announcing we're doing video. Like, you don't have to do it.
And then more stickiness. Then you have a reason to announce something. That's the best way to do things. Just get started and iterate in public. Honestly, people love watching people kind of adjust and make things better.
Yeah, for sure. And then, I mean, that sounds like a good piece of advice, but just to round things out, are there maybe sort of 3 things or so that you commonly hear with your clients, that advice that you always have to share with them, that the listeners might need to hear?
remember your first episode's always going to be the roughest. I've been doing this for 15 years. Every episode, every season of a show, you're coming back from a break, you're a little bit rusty, or you're starting your podcast, you haven't found your flow yet. The first episode's always brutal, but put it out there. Because then you're going to get into a flow of like, all right, every week, every 2 weeks, every month we're putting out a show, and you're going to get better because you're going to get the reps in. And that's what kind of matters. Number 2, honestly, don't worry about video right away. If you do something like Squadcast or Riverside or StreamYard, you have the video. You don't have to use it right away. You can keep it and then release clips using it. There's plenty of ways to do that. And third, AI can be your friend because it saves so much more time if you use something like Opus Clips or Cast Magic, because then you're not sitting there transcribing the whole podcast yourself. Can you imagine? That's how we used to do things. Oy.
Awesome. Thank you. So first episode is always the roughest. I was speaking to someone in this space, Eric Melkor, last week, and we were talking about that. It's like saying when you recommend a TV show to someone, it's the first episode, but you never recommend the first podcast episode typically when you're recommending a podcast.
No.
And yeah, not worrying about video straight away, and then AI being that's another thing I've been thinking about, like the do's and don'ts of AI and podcasting, because like you say, there are definitely some areas that it can be a benefit, but then I think it is still being overused in some areas, like when some people want to replace their whole voice, replace the whole podcast with AI, and not have to do any of it.
Oh, you don't do that.
Yeah.
Don't do that, yeah.
Yeah, maybe one day, but it's doesn't sound quite right. I don't think. Cool. Okay, so thank you for joining me. I'm sure that's been really helpful for a lot of people. And if anyone wants to check out Entrepreneur's Enigma, you can find that wherever you find your podcast. Is there anywhere else you'd like to send podcasters who are linked to?
You can always go to social. You can go to social.sethgoldstein.me. All my links are there. I checked that this morning. I'm like, is everything in there that, Joe's going to need? Yeah, everything there. Social.sethgoldstein.me.
Social.
And there's a free giveaway up. There's a free giveaway up there, Podcasting 101 ebook. You can get that there as well. So
awesome. Thanks for that. And I'll drop that in the show notes.
Awesome. Well, thank you for having me.
No problem. It's been a pleasure. Take care.
Thanks for listening to Podcasting Amplified. If you enjoyed today's episode, please leave a review on your favourite podcast platform. We'll be back next time with another conversation offering more insights to take your podcast to the next level and help you to achieve success. Happy podcasting.